Today we're going to take a look at the cultural developments that took place in America after World War II and into the 1950s. Following World War II, the impacts of the Depression started to fade in America, partly because of the war itself and partly because of the effects of Roosevelt's New Deal. As a result, Americans in the late 40s and early 50s began to enjoy a higher level of wages and disposable income. The idea of family and youth culture began to strengthen, with the idea of the teenager being introduced for the first time, and things like brands, advertising and product ownership began to develop even more than it had done in the 20s. In the pictures here, you can see a family and their friends enjoying a ride in a Chevrolet or a Chevy, which replaced the Model T as the most popular model of the country, with a lot of families buying and owning a Chevy, either buying it on credit or buying it outright because of the new wages. The widespread ownership of the television set in 1950s America did a similar thing to what the radio did in the 1920s. The idea of the celebrity became even stronger, past the people like Louis Armstrong of the 20s, something that we will get into more detail soon, but in the top right picture you may recognise figures such as Marilyn Monroe and Elvis Presley, to name but a few. You can also see President Dwight Eisenhower on the left of the picture, and in the background numerous sports people and musical artists who we'll get to in a minute. The TV was one of the reasons that these people reached such levels of fame, because it almost made them accessible in people's homes. You could actually see these people in your living room, something that had never really been experienced before. So it was a new experience altogether. The increased wages and cultural developments of the 50s also gave way to a new group, the teenager. Celebrities like James Dean, who you can see in the top left of this slide, Elvis Presley, Marilyn Monroe, Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. gave a new spread of role models for young people to look up to. The development of things like drive-in movies meant that young people had a place, free of adult supervision, to socialise with each other. Celebrities like James Dean were especially influential to teenagers, as many of his roles were shown as a restless rebel desperate to be free of the parents' control. One of his most famous films was called Rebel Without a Cause, where it was basically about him not wanting to do what his parents said and rebelling as much as he could against them. A lot of teenagers connected with this idea, and it had an impact on the way that they dressed, acted, and the things that they just did in day-to-day life. Finally, the development of the suburb meant that families were moving out of the city and into the more rural areas. A suburb was basically a town-like setting that was placed just outside of the city limits, meaning that people didn't have to deal with the traffic and the noise of the inner city, but they could still be close enough to their city jobs, but they were enjoying a more countryside-like surrounding. This developed more of a sense of community because you had more of a sense of your neighbours, because you were living in houses instead of apartment blocks and things like that. And it was also a demonstration of everybody's newfound wealth that people were enjoying because they could afford to buy these houses, which they hadn't been able to afford before. So the 50s was basically a departure from everything that the Depression had shown about America, and it was the first time people started to enjoy the recovery from the Depression after World War II.